Hello friends! My break from posting Pure Black is over. I just posted page 1 of part 3 on my Tumblr and on my website. Today's video was originally going to be sort of a speed drawing making of video for this page. Unfortunately, I had some hardware issues and I lost the video project that had the screen recordings of all of the work I put into this page. So I'm going to go through and try to just explain as best I can how I made this. I decided to start this series of making of videos for Pure Black because I've gotten questions before about how I do certain things, like how I do the shading and stuff like that. And so I just wanted to kind of share that with some other artists. I don't think I'm necessarily the most efficient comic artist out there, but I do things in a way that just makes it easier for me in the long run. And I sort of wanted to demystify this whole process for people who want to get into making comics and maybe feel like they don't know where to begin. So here is how I made page 1 of part 3 of Pure Black. So this was my initial little sketch for sort of how I wanted the page to be. I already had a really good idea of what I wanted to do for this page, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time on the layout. I just was able to sketch it all out real quick. So from there, I used the frame tool, and I just draw like a big rectangle frame over the whole page within this border, and then I just used the divide frame folder tool to split it up into my individual panels. I like to keep everything in its own little frame folder because it helps me kind of keep track of where everything is. So normally what I do once I have my panel set up is I use red to sketch in the panel in a little more detail. I don't have any of the layers saved from that process. I deleted them as I was going to kind of keep the document a bit more clean. But I'll be able to show you. I mean, I just redraw things until I'm pretty happy with them, and eventually I'll be able to show you that with a later page. So once I've done all my penciling in red, for this particular page I started with the background because it's like a forest scene, and those are honestly pretty easy to draw. So that's what ended up being the ink lines for that. I'm just going to go ahead and turn all of my backgrounds on for all of my panels so I can show you what I did. So I did sketch these out in red first and then draw them, but I didn't make sure to follow my original sketches too closely because I like to kind of do it kind of quickly and loosely so it looks a bit more organic. Okay, and then the next thing I did is I went ahead and flatted the colors in all of the backgrounds. And so it's just throwing down a color for the ground, a color for the foliage, and a color for the tree trunks. I did go in and use my custom leaf tool to sort of blend the edges of the tree trunks into the ground because, you know, leaves kind of gather around the forest floor. It's not going to be exactly just a hard line. Okay, so back to the first panel here. So what I usually do then is once I have the background put in and flatted, I will start sketching in the character. And so like I said, I'll sketch it in red and just keep building on the pencils until I get pretty close to what I want, or till I'm confident that I can just draw on top of it and get exactly what I want. And then that's when I ink the drawing. And I keep a lot of things on separate layers because I tend to change my mind and move things around a lot. So that's why even like the hair you see, it's on its own layer. And there's a reason for that as well, for coloring purposes. So then, you know, once I get my character inked, then I flat them, and I have color palettes saved for, let's see, well, I don't have, okay, I don't have a color palette saved for him. Oh wait, yeah, there it is. It's under the Katja color palette. So, and this is, of course, taking place on an alien planet. So because of like the different, I had the idea of, like, since it's a slightly different atmosphere, the lighting's a little different, and so everything's just a little more pinkish than it is when they're on their home planet. So, alright, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see him a little bit better. So yeah, I just like flatten all the colors, and I do just like a little bit of detail colors in the hair and in the eyes. And so this is the way I always do characters. I then, okay, so I don't have this part done, so I can show you this. So I keep the hair on a separate layer, the color and the lines, because what I do is I duplicate this hair layer, and then I turn the opacity down to 50%, and then I move that so it's only under the hair outline layer. And so what that does is now where his hair, where you can see his eyebrow through his hair, it's has a little transparency over it. So as I have a lot of characters who their hair is kind of in their eyes all the time, and I don't want to just like obscure their faces. So that's the way I like to do that. And I mean, you can just do this with your colors or whatever, but I like to do it this way. So like I said, I like to change my mind a lot, so I want to be able to go back and fix things as needed. And then the thing to look out for, since I do it this way, is I always have like some color like overlapping like the ear most often. So I just go through and erase it from that area. And oh yeah, there's a little bit on his forehead right here too, because I mean I really only need it to be like right here over his eyebrow, but it's easier to just copy it, the whole thing, and do that. So, and then the other thing I always do is I'll put highlights on the eye. Sometimes I do it on the same layer as the 50% opacity hair layer, but since I just created that layer, obviously they're on two different layers. And then I always do these like hair highlights. I do those at 60% because you can kind of think of them as being just sort of little flyaway hairs that the light is catching, so they're lighter and you can see through them and everything, you know what I mean. And then, yeah, and then this is just my shading. Noticed a little something here. Let's see. There we go. I missed a little bit of the coloring on his eye right there. So, okay, and then, so we do this sort of like anatomical forms shading layer. I've got some little places I need to fix up just a little bit for this layer, so I'm going to just do that real quick here. So, you know, depending on how much lighting there is in the particular scene, I'll do this a little heavier or a little lighter sometimes. He's in a forest, so there's a lot of shadow on him right now, so I did his shading just a little bit heavier. And also, since he's in a forest, I just did like a bit of shading over his whole body, and that's just the way I like to do it, because as I'm working off these color palettes I made, I want to make sure that the colors are correct for the amount of light in the scene, and that the color palette kind of matches. And then one thing I kind of do to sort of help the character look a little more three-dimensional is I do this kind of like soft shading layer, and this one's pretty dark because I wanted to make sure to like sort of darken off the shadows around him. Because then once I put in the shading for the background, you know, it's pretty dark, so I just want to make sure he looks like he's really in this like very shadowy space. I mean, he's still like a little bit better lit than the background, but you know, wanted to pop just a little bit. And so when I was making this page, I sort of realized that he didn't really, his outlines were just a little too thin, so he didn't really look like he kind of blended into the space very well. So I just did this one little layer where I just made a thicker outline around him, like that. And I didn't go in and just change the layer I already had because it was just easier to do it. It's actually like behind him, so the way I did it is I sort of overlapped under him a little bit because it just went a little faster that way instead of having to fuss around with the lines I'd already drawn. So that is the first panel completed. So I'll just go through and turn on all of the drawings and the color and the shading for each panel. Okay, and so the thing with the way I shade the forest scene, let me just go back and kind of talk about that a little bit. So after I do the flatting, I put in some shade with a custom leaf brush that I made. So okay, yeah, I have it selected right there already actually. Let me just make a new layer and kind of show you what it looks like. And so yeah, I just drew like a few different leaves and I made them into like different brush tip shapes. And so like I can just do these like little thin lines with it, or like bigger, thicker leaves if I press down harder. And I just change like the size of the brush tip a lot to or the particle is what they call it. So it's like the little shapes that you put in to be the different brush tip shapes or particles, and so you can change the size to make them like a lot bigger if you have like a really close up area of some leaves you need to put in. And so I use that to do like this sort of like texture shading on these trees, and I do it to put the shadow around the base of the trees and to put some shade into like any leaves that might be seen. And then I do this sort of just shadow all over everything. I'm gonna hide the color and the leaves so you can see. So I shaded all the tree trunks, but I kept, I sort of did like a gradient on the ground, and the foliage on the trees in the background I kept light because that's kind of more toward the edge of the forest. There's a bit more light entering this area, and it just gives the background a little bit of dimension. Okay, so for these two guys, since I'd never drawn them before, I didn't have a color palette like already made. So what it is, I colored them, I should say, in just the regular sort of Gaia home planet colors, and then I did like a little color correction layer to make them look like they're on this planet, to give them that kind of pinkish hue. And so there's a blood splatter brush that I made where I used to do all the blood on his like shirt here, and I just kind of used like a soft pencil tool to kind of make it so that where it's like seeping into his pants and everything. And the same thing with him where he's like laying in a pool of his own blood. I'll turn that layer on in a second, so it's all seeping up into his shirt and his hair. Okay, and then in this background layer I just put like some of that blood onto this tree and the ground and everything, so they're just sitting in these giant pools of their own blood. And like I said, I did that with my my blood splattered custom brush that I made. Okay, and then there's not a lot of dialogue on this page, so there's not really much to talk about there. It's just Joseph yelling out for Connell, trying to find him, and then this is sort of the way I like to do sound effects. I like to do them in just sort of white text so they pop against the background, and I rasterize the layer so I can manipulate the shape a bit more than it lets you do with just regular text. And so I sort of made it look like it's almost like coming out of his mouth, you know, at an angle here. Okay, so I think that's about it for this page. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but my cat is sitting next to me purring really, really loud right now. Here is the finished page again, and this is the final version, ready to post. No more changes are happening. I'm pretty excited about starting part 3. I've been doing Pure Black for a little over a year now, so I want to say thank you to everyone who's been keeping up with it all this time. I really appreciate that. And I hope you guys are excited about what's coming in part 3. I know I am. And if you're not caught up on Pure Black, you can read it on my Tumblr or on my website, which are both linked in the description box. Or you can follow me on any of my social media. I'll be posting a new page of Pure Black and a new making of video every Wednesday. If you don't want to miss any of those, make sure you are subscribed or you're following me on any of those social media I mentioned earlier. And the music in today's video is the X15 EP by Aura Heavy Industry. If you'd like to hear more, I have links for that all down in the description box. Thank you for watching today, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!